Number 14, Administrative Committee. Presentation of Administrative Proposal 2018 budget.
Okay, for the 2018 budget, we have made several presentations regarding this. We've talked about it in several committee meetings now. We have a special budget hearing, public hearing, public meeting about the budget. We talked about it again in the committee meetings this month. So the material that you were presented with last month has not changed. That is the information that is in the proposed budget that was published again in the newspaper. You've got the handouts for that again. I just wanted to reiterate a few things and kind of walk through this again. There are people that have not probably seen this before, but we'll kind of walk through it again. The rate history, the proposed budget that you have in front of you does have a tax rate of $3.10, which is a slight decrease over last year's tax rate. There are a couple of components that make up the proposed levy. One is the operating levy, which is the one that is subject to the levy limits imposed by the state. And there are special purpose levy. Those are things that fall outside of what is limited by the levy limits at the state. So the proposed total levy, $10.8 million. Again, the levy limit calculation, the top portion up there, the 9.8 million, describes what is under the levy limits, and that is the amount of levy that we had last year, plus the net new construction, which is allowed under the levy limit rules, which is about $69,000 of additional levy that we can levy for this year, and that's all we can levy for in addition to what we had last year. There's also a debt levy increase, which we're allowed to tax for as well within the levy. There are things that fall outside of the levy limits, but things that do fall with or come in the tax rate. Those are the library, the bridge and culvert aids, and the EMS service. So those components are what make up the total levy, and that's where we get the $10.6 million, which is a $168,000 increase over last year's levy, but the tax rate does decrease based on property values. The EMS levy, the 2018 versus 2017, that is one of the larger components of the tax levy that falls outside of the levy limits. Again, there is a deficit budgeted for ambulance service. That is, we do collect fees for the service that we provide, but it is not adequate to meet the expenses. So there is that planned deficit. There are also the indirect costs that were originally estimated the same as last year. We've got a draft of that indirect report now, and we're needing to reduce that about $25,000 based on the new numbers that we got, and we'll talk about what that means, but let me just kind of run through the rest of this here. There are other allocated costs and equipment related to the ambulance service, which gives us a total EMS levy of $600,000, which is about 17 cents on $1,000 of assessed value. We talked about employee compensation, that we have planned for upgrading the entire grid within the 2018 budget, and continuing to progress employees through the steps up to the control point. There are some changes in staffing that is proposed within the budget. Again, that one full-time equivalent courthouse security person that we added temporarily in the 2017 year would be added officially to the pay plan if you chose to do that. That is included in the budget. We talked about adding a jailer, which is included in the budget, which would help reduce some of the overtime and the turnover of staffing within the jail. That's been a problem. That is the way that they have decided that they could best address that. We talked about transferring a half-time person that is currently within the sheriff's department into administration for the human resources function. We talked about adding one FTE or full-time equivalent for a criminal justice coordinator, so that is in the budget. That has been identified as one of the things that the board contemplated needing and wanting. We did add funding, and originally we talked about adding up to one full-time equivalent for court counsel or an type position within the county. I think after further contemplation, I think maybe our best bet would be the alternative there under statute 5942, that is assigning an attorney designee, kind of like what we do now. We currently have Tom Duffy Jr. as our corporation counsel. He does a lot of work for us in children's support and Health and Human Services Department, as well as other things that we request of him to do on the legal advice. But we also use attorneys for specialized activities such as human resource questions, compliance with laws, and we use currently have used Will Riley for that. We've used some other attorneys as well, but I think we would be better off not hiring a person on staff, but continuing to use a local attorney as well as specialized attorneys where the need arises. So there may be additional funding required for that, because we have not probably used an attorney to the extent that we could for either attending meetings or making sure that we're compliant with various things, including review of contracts and other various things that come up. So still requesting some additional funding for that area. On the district attorney side, we did incorporate a victim witness coordinator, a half-time position last year within the budget. We're increasing that, so that's a full-time person by adding a half position in the 2018 budget. And there is funding for that on the state side, so on the budget side as a county levy, it does not affect the levy, but it does help the district attorney's office. On the Health and Human Services front, we've been back and forth on the counselors. We had 2 counselors in the budget prior. Both of those are currently vacant. We're proposing to eliminate one of those counselors and hiring the one vacant counselor at this point. And then one FTE, the elder benefit specialist. I think I had called it economic benefit specialist as a misstatement before. That is the elder benefit specialist. That was formerly performed at the Senior Resource Center. That person has since left employment at the Senior Resource Center, and we had that discussion about bringing that back in-house. So those are the changes in staffing. During the budget process, all of the changes, whether they're additions or deletions, are formally adopted by the board. We don't change those until they're officially adopted, and that gets worked into the pay plan.
Tom?
Yes.
I think with this new comprehensive community services resolution we just passed, it's really going to take some heat out of our health and human services, DOD, and council also.
Good. Okay, one of the things, and trying to point out some of the major changes that are really performed by Otto. Don't know his last name, but I know him as Otto. He is, thank you, since retired. And then the department director, Lori Lavery, has also retired. The director function is now done by a regional coordinator type person, but there's still a function. The 4-H coordinator was the other part of her job. But we talked about in a couple of meetings keeping that 4-H program coordinator and combining that with the youth and family extension educator to create a position instead of what we had previously. So that is a savings over what was in the budget last year, but it is a different level of service as well. So you have the option of reviewing that and doing what you will with it, but currently this is what is in the proposed budget.
Tom?
Yes.
I share Linda's concern with the ag extension educator, Otto. He's going to be a big loss to a lot of the ag people in the county, and I'm just wondering, what are the other two counties doing? You know, did they just eliminate a position also? Or
Yes.
did they hire some? Yes, what?
Lori Beltrusis is our regional person. Do you want to help answer that question?
Sure. I can let you know that both Washburn and Burnett County have eliminated Otto's position as well, right now. You know, I think everyone is certainly in that discussion period of what do we really want. Washburn County has not decreased their bottom line number for their budget. They're just they're having conversations of, do we want a natural resource person? Do we want, you know, how do we want to use our money as we move forward? But as right now, they have the same kind of spreadsheet, and they've eliminated Otto's position as well. You know, what we're hopeful for, you know, everyone's waiting to see what happens with extension restructuring, but, you know, will we be able to tap into the resources of an outreach specialist or some other people through the state? And now that we're even better connected to the university through the, you know, Rework 3.0, I think is what some of my colleagues are calling it, will that better connect us to some specialists and some resources? And can we get them above Highway 8, you know? Can we get them up here? So, yeah, I know, it's a loss, and I think we're all trying to figure out how can we better deal with it.
Thank you.
Sure.
I mean, I like Kevin, but he's not.
He's not on it, no. Different.
And I should point out here too, I mean, these are items that are in or not in the proposed budget. So you now have the budget in your hands and can make changes to the proposed budget. And we do have to stay within the levy limit. So if you make an addition somewhere in the budget, you have to make a corresponding change somewhere else so that, you know, we don't add funding or levy other than what we're at now. So you are allowed to make those changes as you so wish, but we need to keep things in balance. So just keep that in mind as we talk about the different things. The other thing is outside organizations, and we had a couple of people talk about a couple of the items here. These are organizations that the county funds with tax levy, that is within the operating levy, that is, it is subject to the levy limits, but we do fund several organizations. Again, there are a couple of them in red that signify a change in what they had requested versus what is in the budget. The fair requested a little bit more. Senior Resource Center had increased in their proposal. When we talked with them, I think there was some miscalculations in what they had originally suggested, but we are funding them, or proposed to be funded, at the same level that they were last year. Same with the Hayward Lakes Visitors Convention Bureau. That's in red because we did have discussions about whether we wanted to continue funding that with tax levy or whether they had alternative funding that they could utilize, whether that be room tax or other sources of funding rather than tax dollars.
The elderly benefit specialist was the previous year requested from the Senior Resource Center, including the salary. I don't remember now.
Last year, the Senior Resource Center did have the elderly benefit specialist within their budget. The reason that it was advantageous for us to do it, even though we can pay them more, give them benefits, we get the drawdown with that. So we had that analysis at Health and Human Services where we talked about what that does to our budget when it's brought over here. So that reduction on the Senior Resource Center side, don't remember exactly what that was, but that was included in that budget last year and not this year.
So we're taking over that cost this year in our budget?
We're taking over the position, but because of the Medicare drawdown that we get, it was, I think there was a slight increase in cost to the county, but it was a benefit because we could hire a person at a slightly higher wage and give them benefits and still provide the employee with more, but not costing the county more. I think it was,
It's like $7,000.
yeah. Thank you.
question, a couple things. Outside organizations, one, we are funding Sawyer County Development Corporation, but just because it's not coming within the operating levy, we're not listing that anywhere, correct?
I'm sorry, I did put it here, but it's not an operating levy. That is one of the things that is funded from resource
And
development.
isn't also the Reserve Intervention Bureau going to be funded from resource development in the current budget?
Yes, good point, thank
I
you.
think it's just important that people realize that we are funding that organization, even though it's not showing up anywhere.
Yes. Yes,
It's not on here, that's why I'm bringing it up.
what is not on there?
Sawyer County Development Corporation.
Okay, and I neglected to put that on there, but I did put it on here, even though it shows that it's within the operating levy, but it's really,
And neither
Money.
is, okay, and neither is the other one.
yeah,
Both of those are coming out of research development.
thank you, yes.
I've got a question on an Economic Development Corporation. I've asked the question before, I'm gonna ask it again. I thought in the beginning when we said that we were gonna approve that we were not gonna put money towards it. Am I mistaken on that?
We did fund it, last year was the first year that it was reestablished, and they do get a match, or they get matching funds based on the county contribution, and that's the number that they requested in 2018, and of course you have the option of funding that or not funding that, but it is in the proposed budget.
Was it requested
Yes,
for each year?
yes.
Does that answer your question,
Well, I guess it does. Like I said, I'm still confused on the part of when we said yes to the organization, we stated that we were not going to be using county funds for it. And that was my understanding, unless I am incorrect, and somebody answer that question. Am I correct on that? Okay. So my question then is now, why are we putting money towards it?
Well, the time that we did okay the concept of it, there was also $20,000 attached to it.
Well, my understanding was they were going to be
I
going out looking for funds
Yep.
so that we would not have to be funding it. So now we are funding it.
Yes.
It is a request that they made, as they did last year. Again, the 2018 amount would come from resource development. It wouldn't affect the tax rate if you funded it or didn't fund it, but it would affect the balance in resource development fund. And so it does come out of there because it is an economic purpose, which is one of the purposes of resource development fund. So it was funded last year. It's in the proposed budget. You may change that if you like.
And the tribe also funds that, and I'm on the committee for the tribe. And we've got some very good meetings for both the county and the tribe.
But if I remember correctly, it was seed money
And
in
yes,
2017.
We only have 1 year to operate, and they need time to get things going. I think they're doing a good job with it, been so far.
Okay. And the reason I'm bringing these up, because I think out of all the lines, these are things that you might want to consider. So we're trying to hit some of the topics here that might stir your interest here. So on the libraries, we did have some discussion in the public side of things about the special levy for libraries. Again, these are amounts that fall outside the levy limit, so they can be funded at whatever your desire is. It does increase the taxes if you increase what you fund them with, or decreases if you decrease it. But the point is that the Sherman and Ruth Weiss Community Library had requested $200,000 this year, which is a $52,000 increase over what they requested last year. In the proposed budget, I split the difference and put in an additional $26,000 from what they got last year. they can probably talk more about their budget and why they asked for such a large increase. They also had their debt payment paid off, I believe, last year, which is a $25,000 savings to them, if you will, that they don't have to pay anymore. So it's a question of, how much do you want to fund that facility? How much do you want to pick up of that increase that they have in their budget? That's up to your prerogative to make that adjustment if any is necessary. Likewise, there was some talk about the winter library and should that receive a likable increase or not compared to the Hayward Library. They had requested $58,149, so I put it in the budget as what they requested. Again, that's something that you can change if that's your prerogative. And the Elton County Library reimbursements are in there as well.
Just so everybody knows a little bit, when we did have this in front of the administrative committee, we talked about the Hayward Library compared to the Winter Library. And it was talked about if Winter Library had special needs, they could certainly come to the county board and ask for more funding at that time, but this is what they asked for the year of going into 18. Yeah.
So that means that the West Library could also come if they had additional
Yes.
money necessary. Needed.
Yes.
Is that outside the budget process, Ron? Or would that be before the budget is passed?
It would have to be before the budget's passed.
So has that been communicated to Donna, as the Winter Library?
I believe it hasn't been.
Just now is the first I heard of that.
Go ahead.
That was one of the things, I think, at one of the meetings that I suggested to several of the county board members there that if Winter needed more money for additional things, to please come back and bring that to us, because I think the board is very supportive of not only the Hayward Library, but obviously the Winter Library too. So I don't know if there is things that you have at this point that aren't in your budget, or if there's things going forward for next year or whatever. I think you should definitely keep that in mind, because I think, at this point, it seems you do have a board that's willing to support the system. So.
Mr. Chairman, do you know why the Hayward Library requested $52,000 more?
I can explain basically. Couple things as far as the debt being paid off, that's been a wonderful thing. But we had a individual, very fortunate, who had basically kind of signed on that he would help finance that debt. So that was money that was coming in from an outside source, but once the debt was paid off, there was no additional that he was going to continue to contribute that additional money for that debt service. That was kind of just one of the things that he was doing on an individual. What has been happening with the operating budget for the library is that there was some excess funds that were left over from the building project. And as it's gone on, those excess funds have been able to be used to support the library. So at this point, there's probably approximately $130,000 a year that has been coming in from that outside support source to continue the general operation of the library. Looking at things, that's not going to continue. Realistically, the money will be gone. So look at trying to develop a 5-year plan. Realistically, what could be done to try to continue the level of service there, increase funding, to replace the funds that are no longer going to be there. One of the sources was the county. The foundation, we're hoping, is going to be up and running. They're looking at some things that if that can generate enough revenue or get to the point where it can generate revenue, they will start to supplement the budget of the library. So it's a realistic budget. The other thing that was done that was realistic that had never been done before is that we also, based on the county, because they were so wise in doing it, looked at a capital improvement program. And the reason we did that is because the library is now 10 plus years old, and all of a sudden you're looking at, when are we going to replace the carpet, or when are we going to do this? And there's no money budgeted anywhere for that. So part of the process was to actually start to put some money into a capital improvement plan so that we could start to anticipate those things going forward. So it was a combination of things, to try to bring the finances into a realistic picture. I think both of our libraries, or all of our library systems, are a tremendous deal to the taxpayers in our county. I would encourage you to fund them all at the levels that they requested. I would encourage Winter, if they have additional needs, to please bring that in the budget another year. I could quote you so many things about libraries and what they do for communities, and you probably already have heard me enough on these things, but I think this is money that we can spend on the front end to prevent costs on the back end. The state's dictating that we cannot raise taxes for mental health services, or we cannot raise taxes for this, or we cannot raise taxes for anything else. These are outside the levy limits. This is the one thing that we can do that I look at as preventative, that is not tied to something that the state is saying that we can't do. Libraries are an invaluable resource for people in our county in general. I mean, we are a poor economic county. Usership is all across the board. I did find all kinds of interesting things about the roles of libraries, but I found a really interesting quote, I guess, from Thomas Jefferson back in 1809. It says, "I have thought that nothing would do more extensive good at a small expense than the establishment of a small circulatory library in every county, to consist of a few well-chosen books to be lent to the people of the county under regulations as would secure their safe return in due time." So this was back in 1809, and already the concept was that this would be a greater public good for everybody within the counties if you could have libraries and places available to people. I just think it's something that we should do. If we save the cost of housing one inmate, what does it cost to house an inmate a month? $20,000 or whatever? That's cheap. So I would really encourage you to fund all libraries at what they requested.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I agree with Kathy on that. The libraries, they are very important, the Winter and the Hayward Library. I think they should be given what they're asking for. And a question or thing to Donna, I passed that on to one of your coworkers, but apparently you didn't get it. Yeah, so we talked about it before. And if you needed more money to come to the board, well, I passed it on, but you must not have gotten the message.
Mr. Bass?
I thought a couple of years ago, I don't remember what committee it was, but there was talk about figuring out a sliding scale, something to do with the percentage of increase based on readership or I don't remember. But that seemed kind of balanced up there.
I think it was the population they use in the library, I think is what you're relating to.
Whatever. Winter's taking a decrease, Hayward's getting an increase.
They both get
No,
an
we're
increase.
still in the increase rate.
Good increase.
I was just gonna say, the only other thing is actually, if you look at the increase that at least the Hayward Library is asking for this year, and this was based on 2016 equalized value, not 2017, if you took that increase, basically what you'd be looking at is on a $100,000 piece of property, an increase in property taxes of $1.50. So if you have a $200,000 piece of property, that's gonna increase your taxes by $3, a cup of coffee. So I think there's just great value here, and I think we'd be remiss not to do this when we're funding other things that.
Moving on.
All right, I was sidetracked by a $3 cup of coffee, so.
I know, you get yours for $1.
Yeah. Okay, so again, on the special levy side, you can make changes here, and it doesn't affect the levy limit, but it does affect the tax rate. So, moving on to the capital improvement plan. This is the cover sheet of the capital improvement plan. You've got the full packet in front of you, but Just to note again that we've got total expenditures in the CIP of 1.7 million, and that is funded by different things, either transfers from resource development, use of transfers or operating levy, all kind of fund that capital improvement plan. You can see as we get out, this is a 5-year plan, as we get out in years 2 through 5, we do have a funding deficit, which is things that we need to address in future years. But that's what this plan is about, is to show you that we do have expenditures coming up and how are we going to fund those. So within this plan, you'll also notice there was some discussion today about the Tiger Cat Dam and the concern about the funding level that we have within that project. I draw your attention to the red items on this list. On the expenditure side, you see that there is $200,000 budgeted currently for the Tiger Cat Dam repairs. I think the gentleman earlier was talking about the 100,000 county contribution. And that $100,000 for dam repairs scheduled to come out of the Resource Development Fund. Again, that is the fund that is there established for this type of purchase or purpose. And the other $100,000 coming from the state DNR grant. There was some discussion about there is a match from the DNR. There was some discussion about the maximum amount of that grant, and I believe there's, well, Dale can probably address that further, but I want to point out that, we don't have a plan. We don't know how much the repairs are going to cost. We don't know what type of structure is needed to do those repairs. So at this point, we don't know if the number is 200,000, 400,000. It could be higher. It could be 200,000. You have the opportunity at this time to address the situation if you feel the need. And if you do that, we could increase the contribution from Resource Development Fund. You could also address that by special assessments as an option for funding this type of activity or some other funding source. But again, at this time, just wanted to point out that that is the number that is concerning some of the residents here, and if you have some other questions about how to address that, we can talk a little bit more about that. And how do we address all these things? We've got to adopt the budget in November, and we do that by doing several different things. We talked about the changes in position, so you would be adopting those changes if there are any. You would be adopting the pay plan at that time. You would be doing motions to change the public budget. That is, you can make any change that you want, but in order to keep them in balance and all get agreement on those changes, you would be making motions about those changes that you want to contemplate, which would then change the published budget, and then you would be adopting the budget that you are comfortable with. And you would adopt that budget with a resolution, and that budget would be adopted with a majority vote. We do budget adjustments, throughout the year as needed to move money from here to there or to add grants and those sorts of things. Any budget adjustment that happens in the future requires a 2/3 vote. So the changes that you make now only need a majority vote, and so the budget is in your hands, and we can talk about any topic that you want more information on or have concerns about. And
Yeah.
Can I ask a question about the resource development? I don't remember the years, but back about 10 years ago, up until that time, we would put stumpage fees out of the forestry department into that resource development fund. About 10 years ago, they quit doing that. Now again, we're pulling some money out of that resource development fund. I don't need to know the balance, but are we just gonna deplete that fund? What is the future of that fund? That's what I'm asking. Are we gonna start putting money back into it for some stumpage out of forestry like we used to do and it worked really well? What is our plan for that fund?
those were the good days.
I don't.
Yeah, and a couple of years ago, we did have a very good year, and that was the year we had 800 and some thousand in excess in funds, which actually we used them to establish the capital improvement plan. So that was kind of the seed money for the capital improvement plan. But as you see, in the prior slide, there's not enough funding in the capital improvement plan either. On the operating side, we are operating with a very tight budget. We've added some things this year, as a court security person, a criminal justice person. We're adding some services, and it's difficult to do when we've got levy limits the way that we are, and we're not going to be able to sustain that kind of activity into the future. So, the forestry revenue that we get, we need every penny of it. Now, this year, we've got some concerns with the amount budgeted and the amount coming in. We've had a very wet summer. We've got the contracts out there, but because of the activity or lack thereof, those revenues are lacking. Greg has told us it is not time to press the panic button, although I think he's got his finger on it for this year. I think the money rolls in next year if we don't get it this year, but we did go hog wild on revenue for 2018 on the forestry side because those kinds of things happen. State sales tax is our other main source of revenue besides property tax. Sales tax we did increase this year. It might go up a little bit, but we're using all those dollars. So to answer your question, is there excess that we can put pots of money around like the good old days? No, that we're so tight now that we're really stretched on using those dollars. So we do have a balance in that resource development fund. We use it for dam repairs. We use it for economic development. I think there's a couple other stated uses for that, but that's kind of where we're at with that. Long answer to a short question.
What are the new positions that we're looking at bringing on this year? I know what court officer, I can't remember the other one. Jailer. Okay.
Somewhere. There it is. So those are the changes contemplated.
So are we hired, we're not finding a full-time legal counsel, you said that was not in the budget, correct?
Well, we've got funding added, and I kind of said either for a person or a designee, and I'm telling you I'm kind of leaning towards the designee idea, and if that's the case, we may not need that extra funding, not totally the amount of funding that we put in there, so there might be a little bit of room there that we could use to accommodate that change I talked about earlier in the $25,000 in indirect costs from in the ambulance levy. We need to move that back into the general fund, and so that $25,000 that moves into the general fund, we need to reduce something else, and I think if we reduce that attorney added money by $25,000, that would be a good way to do that.
So that's my question then, so if we outsource all this, how much additional money was built into this budget for additional attorneys? And was it by departments or line items, or where was it?
Yeah, it's currently just part in contingency, just, it was easier to do that way rather than spread it to the departments, but in that sheet that you have that lists the changes, which I have somewhere, this sheet that has the changes on it, that if you look right below that horizontal line, the general fund expenditure increase for court counsel, $83,000, that's when it was contemplated, full time. So even if we reduce that to, around the $60,000 number, that still gives us.
Especially with our criminal justice coordinator.
Yeah, we've got.
It's not gonna happen right away, but according to our attorneys and judge, 2 to 3 years down the road, we're gonna see much less inmates, maybe no or county.
In the future, we have to think about another judge. We want to think about that now.
Yes, Mr. Duffy.
Mr. Chairman, a good share of these folks that are here today on the Tiger Cat Dam. Can we at least give them some assurance that the county board is not in favor of drawing down the water and we'll do all we can to maintain that water level, even though we aren't appropriating any money tonight?
But we don't have a plan for the DNR.
No, I realize that, but I said they just want some assurance, I think, that where you support and hear their claim, that we're not in favor of drawing the water down.
I agree.
Great.
I agree, there's no plan at the moment, but I think they're looking for something on the board, and I hate to have them leave with nothing. We hear their claim.
I don't know exactly, because we're actually in the middle of a budget discussion, but I want to acknowledge all of the letters that the county board has received. I have read them, and some of you have the same author, but, you know, your message is received, and we believe you. Well, at least I believe you. I'm assuming some of my other colleagues will believe you as well. It's a little bit more complicated, but I stand ready to assist Tiger Cat Association with what they do.
And I think we can give them that assurance by simply indicating that we're gonna budget a significant amount of money, and $100,000 or $100,000 with $100,000 match is not enough money. So I think if we wanna give them that assurance that we should, and the budget, we should show that we're gonna have at least $200,000 coming out of the research development fund and a $200,000 match, because that gives them some assurance that even if we're not here, come the next cycle or whatever, the money was budgeted.
In favor of that.
Mr. Sleep.
Do we have that in the research development fund?
Yes, there is a balance in the resource development fund that could accommodate, you know, a $200,000 contribution for this project. If I may just lay out kind of a couple of scenarios for you. You know, this is the scenario that is currently in the budget, $200,000 expenditure, $100,000 from a DNR grant, $100,000 from resource development. If you wanted to, say, pick a number, $400,000, we could put in the budget then $400,000, $200,000 from resource development, or other funding source, whatever, and Dale can help me with that. Because originally my thought was there's a $100,000 cap on a dam grant, but Dale is telling me there's a program that, or the grant program can accommodate a match of $200,000.
It's the same program, but there's two portions to it. So you can go up to $100,000, or you can go from that $100,000 to $400,000 mark. They split the program, kind of a big dam, small dam thing. That way, a couple of big dams down south on the Chippewa River or something like that don't take up the whole fund in 1 year and everybody else is out. So they allocate some in the $100,000 portion, some in the major dam portion. The $100,000 one is easier to get. When I took my, I don't want to call it a guess because I actually put thought into it, is $200,000 enough to fix it? If it wasn't, I wouldn't have selected $200,000. We would have went for a different scenario. I think it is. And I've read the letters too, and $345,000 for a coffer dam. No, not necessarily. We don't know yet because we don't have a plan finished. As of today, our engineer was out there. Oh, look, there's a concrete apron poured in front of the dam. He said, oh, in that case, we can probably do a coffer dam for $10,000 or $20,000. Then $200,000 all of a sudden is plenty of money. We just don't know.
Sure.
If I did, that'd be great.
Yes. There's been a lot of emails, a lot of communication. There's been a lot of people who came up here with ideas, and I don't want to diminish what their input is. I'm not tied to whatever that we have going forward. I respect Ms. McCoy's contribution and her insight as to what we're trying to do. So, I mean, this isn't, I don't know what happened today. Everyone's wanting this gotcha atmosphere for this meeting is it's a little bit unsettling. We're here to hear the information. We're not making a decision. We're collecting it. And I just wanted to, along with Mr. Duffy, provide the assurances for the people who took time out of their evening to come in and sit with us as we go through this process, to know that whatever that we can do, we are going to do it. Am I going to guarantee that we're going to fix this dam question? I don't know. But we're with it. I respect your opinion. I understand that you are besieged with this, and, you know, I apologize for it. I don't know what's going on with this, you know, I don't know if it's in the water, I don't know if it's because Aaron Rodgers doesn't have two collarbones or what. But I mean, you know, we're here to just give support. That's what I'm here. I heard what they said. Some of them are in my district, some of them are not. I don't even think Tiger Cat's even in there. Let's respect what they said. We have a budget to deal with. We have a lot of questions. There's a lot of people who are going to want a whole bunch of stuff. But we're not going to, we only have a little bit to give, so.
Thank you. Mr. Bassett?
I respect Dale's thoughts on this. But I'm gonna ask you, Mr. Hawk. Down the road, we're gonna get a plan, and along with the plan is gonna come a dollar figure. And let's say if something happens that we didn't believe, and we need that 400,000 instead of the 200,000, can we get it after the fact of the budget somewhere?
Yeah, and I was just going to lay out the scenarios for you. So the next step in the process is Dale will go out and get information and get a plan, and there will be, you know, the engineers will say, this is what can happen, and this is how much it will cost. And it might cost 200,000, might cost 400,000. When that comes forward as a plan, it will go to the land committee. And at that point, you can have the discussion within the land committee about what kind of dam that you feel is appropriate and how much you want to spend on it. And that's where that discussion will continue. And then at that point, if it's more than what we have allocated, you can allocate more at that time, you know, from resource development or whatever. At that time, it would take a 2/3 vote, but we do that occasionally for those kinds of things that crop up that are more expensive than what you had anticipated. However, you could also put in 400,000 now. This is almost like what happened with the ambulance building. You know, in that case, we said, we need an ambulance building, it might cost 400,000, and we will take it out of fund balance as a start. As we progressed through the process, we decided, oh, you know, the building might cost $260,000 or $280,000, and by the way, maybe we want to bond for that, issue debt instead of using fund balance. So in the discussions with public safety and admin, we talk about, okay, here's the real amount that we need, and here's the funding source for it. So it can change once you get a plan, and you know, make that determination at that time. So, and that's the appropriate place to do it. The question I think before you today is, do you want to leave it as it is now? Do you want to, you know, boost that, and you could boost it to 200,000, 400,000 with 200 from each? Doesn't mean that that's what you're going to spend, but it does give some assurance to the folks that you could consider it. But again, it's all going to come down to what that discussion is in land in the future, in the land committee.
Tom, thank you.
Mr. Paulson?
How would we procedurally increase that number to 400,000? Is it a motion, or is it a consensus?
Yeah, I think you should be doing motions at this point, and then that assures consensus about the changes that you're going to make to the budget, whether it's this or the other items that you want to discuss.
Well, I would make a motion to increase the dam repair to 400,000.
And I'd second that.
There's a motion by Mr. Paulson, second by Mr. Duffy to increase the dam to 400,000. Discussion.
So if the costs of the dam itself with the drawdown come in less, we automatically do the coffer dam? Is that what you're saying? It sounded like.
All he's saying is put 400,000 available in the budget.
Right, it's just a placeholder.
Yeah.
So the next process is, as Mr. Hoff described, the plan would come to the Land, Water, Forestry Committee, and at that point, the committee would make a determination, a recommendation to the board, whether we want a coffer dam or not.
Ms. Nyberg?
My question is, if you allocate 400,000, you only need the 200,000, what does happen with the additional 200,000?
If you establish a budget of 400,000, the actual cost is 200,000, we would do a contribution from the Resource Development Fund for half and get the grant for the other half. So, and then the rest of it just stays in the Resource Development Fund, and we would not receive the additional grant, obviously, if it wasn't matched when we did.
Thank you.
Further discussion? There's a motion and a second to increase to 400,000 from 200,000. All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Okay? Yes.
I make a motion that we increase that we fund the Sherman and Ruth Weiss Community Library at the amount requested.
Which one is that?
Bring up the libraries, sorry.
That's from 174 to
To 200 they requested.
That's the,
There's a motion by Ms. McCoy, second by Mr. Howie, to increase the Sherman Library up to the 200,000.
Could I request a roll call vote, please?
Any discussion? Hearing none. Carol, will you do a roll call vote, please?
Yes, we'll start with Iris.
Yes.
Schindler,
yes.
Elway,
Yes.
Duffy,
Yes.
Paulson,
Yes.
Bismet,
Yes.
Snyder,
Yes.
Bassett,
Okay, yes.
Boyd,
Good.
Hensley,
Tough one to solve
No.
Yeah.
Buckholz,
No.
Schläger,
No.
McCoy. Yes. Schuman.
Yes.
Motion carries.
So,
Yes.
can I make a motion that we increase the winter and like a percentage?
You can. But I also remind you that we talked about it in the Personnel Administrative Committee.
I wasn't there.
I understand that, and that's why I will share with you that the Hayward Library came with special needs, and that's why they presented that budget. And we talked about winter, didn't only ask for the 58, and we said if they came forward with a special need, we would certainly look at it and address it at that time. And that's why we decided to leave the winter library where it's at presently. Yes.
You know, for discussion, it's unfortunate that Donna didn't get that information, that we wanted to consider what she might need, because the previous discussion had been that she was trying to be conservative, because she knew that we were in budgetary constraints. And I'm glad that she got that information tonight, because we still have time to consider what her needs are if she gets them to us before the November meeting. Am I correct? And I think that the same general affirmation of the need for library in counties, some really wonderful comments about it, will urge us to consider what Donna's needs are, rather than her being conservative, you know, to serve our purposes.
Yes.
Does anybody on this board sit on the Winter Library Board? Does Helen sit on there?
Helen is assigned to that position. I sat in that position for about 10 years.
Oh.
And I've sat on it before.
Well, I guess I'm wondering why that then when Kathy and I and Helen at the budget hearing, we were talking about these libraries, and Kathy did say that if they needed more money, that they could come to the county board and ask for it, and I don't know why Helen wouldn't relay that on, but I did. But I did go through Donna because I didn't know how to get a hold of her. I went through one of her employees, and apparently she didn't get that message.
Can you follow up with her?
Yes.
Dawn, after this meeting?
I
And
will.
really encourage her to
Yes.
get us some more information.
Now I know how to get a hold of her.
Obviously, my motion failed for lack of a second, so.
We didn't even ask for them, we had to call it 3 times. You didn't get a second. You gotta call for it, don't you gotta call for it? Where's our cheat book for Robert Rules of Order?
I would just like to agree with Iris that if Donna has a revised budget that she wants to present to the board, I would also encourage her, like you said, if somebody can get a hold of her, and if there are things that are really needed in that budget, that she presents with a revised.
I will follow up with her tomorrow on that.
So lack of a second, motion failed.
Yes, sir.
Is there a second by discussion?
Pardon? I allowed discussion, yeah, it's not supposed to.
So can I change my vote then from the first one to yes?
So what have, with these couple changes that we made to the budget now, where does that, where and how far off from the imbalance are we down, or roughly just?
Neither of those changes affect the operating levy. So it changes the tax rate slightly, but it doesn't affect the operating levy. Some of those other changes that you may want to contemplate within the levy, then we've got to be a little more careful of additions and subtractions.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions? Yes.
A couple things that I would like to see actually, that I think, one I touched on like before, is that I would like to see we're allocating fund balances that are being applied all over the place. And I would like to see a breakdown of fund balances that are being applied, okay? Whether they're being applied out of excess revenues for 2016, or if they're being applied out of the general fund. I also would like to see with the resource development fund, because I agree with Mr. Bassett on this, really we're just depleting that budget. You're absolutely correct. And so I would like to actually see what our starting balance is, what we're allocating out of there this year for expenditures, and if we are allocating any revenues into it, and what's our projected fund balance for the end of the year for that too. So that we could kind of just see where the money is actually coming from, because, you know, I know with highway we're decreasing the fund balance by 200,000. We're taking fund balance applied of 175,000. We're putting another fund balance, so it'd just be nice to have something that we could track that we can actually see the numbers. Thank you.
Anybody else?